Okay, welcome, guys. We've got Simeon Boykov here today, the Australian Cossack. Thank you very much for coming on the show. Love to have you here. How's everything been going?
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be on the show. Considering the current circumstances, I think we're going all right.
Well, it's good to have that positive outlook. I believe we need more of a positive outlook at the moment with everything going on. And a lot of what you've been doing, I believe, is great in terms of raising awareness for the freedom of Australian people, which I believe is very important. And looking at how we can make a difference and change towards the mentality we have to this, and also looking at how the situation and circumstance can be best dealt with. What I want to look at first and foremostly, which is probably the most alarming thing which you've pointed out. You pointed this out in your Spotify with Dr. Jim Salim on the Boykov report, was the deployment of the military and heavy use of police force surrounding the pandemic. And whether this is reasonably justified or not is an important question. Now, what I want to do, just to give some people some background, and I have my uni transcript here, if you can see. I've studied fascism and anti-fascism, as well as 20th century politics in Australia. So I had a very interesting analysis as to what's been going on, given my line of study. Now, what do you think? Do you believe this is a reasonable use of force in a situation like a pandemic, Simeon?
Well, in the history of the great nation of Australia, Australia's military has been used very rarely in overseas operations. Now, when it's been used overseas, the Australian people have always been against it. And if we look at all the wars where Australia has sent troops overseas to other people's countries, into military engagements against other nations, the Australian people have strongly opposed. Just recently we had troops coming back from Afghanistan, and that was obviously a result of lobbying, a result of the popular opinion of the Australian people who were opposed to our diggers and our soldiers fighting overseas. Now, World War I and conscription, with Prime Minister William Hughes, that was obviously a very major concern for the Australian people. There was a lot of opposition to conscription, and there was opposition to the Vietnam War, sending troops overseas to fight in Vietnam. So for an Australian nation to now cop its own taxpayer-funded defence force against itself is an absolute outrage, and it's extremely un-Australian. The fact that the troops have been sent and targeted into Western Sydney is another outrage. Western Sydney, as we know, is the very highly populated religious sector of the city. That's where the most highest amount of overseas-born Australians live. A lot of migrants, churches, Christian, Orthodox, Catholic, Maronite, Muslim, all different nations and multicultural communities live there. So I think that, in effect, Australia really is, or should I say, the Australian government in this situation is playing with fire here. And I can't recall one historical example where using one's troops against one's people ended well for the government.
Look, absolutely. And one thing I called, and this was before the protest happened in Sydney, was that within a matter of time, some imposition of martial law would be rolled out, right? Within a matter of time. Now, of course, hasn't not been rolled out for all of Sydney, but this is close enough that we're getting to martial law in this part of Sydney, southwestern part of Sydney, to the point that you got army helicopters flying around Granville. You have, you did the video of you in Fairfield driving, saying it was a war zone, which was very interesting because really all people want to do is just live life, go get their groceries, go to their jobs, which they can't fucking go to anymore because they've been barred, and spend time with their families, visit their family. This is what I believe the military is being used to do, to stop people from doing basic living things almost, without question, with questions, right? Can you go out to the corner store without being stopped by military and questioned? I don't think that's really, a free life that Australians are currently living in southwest Sydney.
Well, certainly the unjust targeting of southwest Sydney, Western Sydney, is very obvious and evident. In fact, the Premier and her gang of associates actually altered their language. You know, they realized that they're targeting Southwest Sydney, so now they talk about Sydney as a whole. But the fact is that the military is directed at Southwest Sydney. Now, when the military was brought in, it was brought in under the pretext of combating violent protesters, and we all saw those terrible, scenes where a pot plant was thrown at a police horse, and it's shocking. It's so shocking, to think that could happen in Australia, where a pot plant is thrown at a police horse. It's so sad, and of course, this obviously justifies sending in military. I'm being sarcastic here, obviously. There is no justification.
No, I understand.
Sending in military.
A very little pebble was thrown to cause a storm, to cause a ruckus. And what we're dealing with right now, I believe, is an unjustified imposition of force on the human population. And I would also like to give my perspective as to why they're targeting Southwest Sydney, Canterbury, Bankstown, Marylands, Granville, Liverpool, etc. Right, Blacktown. And there was another guy actually that spoke about this on a video, an Australian guy from Bondi. But I said this before he said it, but I just hadn't made it public. What I believe the Australian government, or the, whatever agenda is on their plan, is what they're trying to do is they're trying to suppress the suburbs where there may be the most uprising against the vaccinations, against the COVID lockdown, because in those communities, as we know it, a strong ethnic community, strong beliefs, strong values, strong sense of community. These men that live within these communities, I'm talking guys who are from the Middle East, from parts of former Yugoslavia, parts of, countries that have come through war-torn affected areas, understand the grounds that they need to hold to protect themselves and their freedom. And they have a lot of masculine energy there, which when, I guess, the boundaries are crossed by the government onto them, they feel a sense of threat. And I believe, this is why they've strategically targeted southwestern Sydney, because if they can weaken down these guys first, it's easy for them to weaken the rest of Australia.
Well, can I say that Southwest Sydney contains the highest number of transport logistic workers, the highest number of construction trades workers. So that means that the highest number of people who are able-bodied and willing, so to speak, the highest amount of people who own off-road vehicles, four-wheel drives, utes, tradies utes, the highest amount of people who most likely potentially have gun licenses, because obviously these people are out west, they're connected to the outdoors. They're certainly not your millennium couch warriors who are living in the city areas. Excuse me. So obviously the government sees Southwest Sydney and Western Sydney as a threat, and it's quite obvious. The problem is that their tactics are absolutely incorrect. Now,
in the end, they're just human beings.
I'd like to go on the record to criticize the New South Wales Police Force Command for their approach, rather than antagonize citizens, rather than antagonize community leaders. And that's what they're doing. They're targeting community leaders. They're targeting multicultural community leaders. And they're attempting to suppress any potential civil unrest through the use of fear and intimidation. Now, my message to the New South Wales Police Force is that the use of fear and intimidation against one's own population has never worked in history. It's completely un-Australian. It goes against everything Australian values stand for. Australian people are very laid back. The Australian people would much rather have a barbecue, and watch the Friday night footy than engage in any protests or violent protests against police. Personally, I can speak for myself. I've gone on the record in the last few months, almost every day, on 2GB, on 2UE, on the Aussie Cossack's YouTube channel, which has racked up millions of views. And I've reinforced the message to not be violent, to not engage in violence. And in retaliation, or, to say thank you for this cooperation in terms of counterterrorism and security, uniformed New South Wales police constables just seem to want to harass and attack and antagonize. It's almost as though they're trying to spark and incite civil unrest. Now, we know that in history, and history repeats itself,
Mm-hmm.
false flag events are an excellent way to give the government an excuse to send in armed troops to arrest everybody, to lock down everybody, to basically enforce police state powers and turn a country into a ghetto or a gulag or a police state. Now, a great example is obviously Germany in the 1930s, setting fire to their own parliament, to increase powers, or the Soviet Union in 1939.
The Reichstag fire, yeah.
Yeah, the Soviet Union in 1939, calling in an artillery strike on their own positions and then attacking Finland.
Mm-hmm.
This is a classic chess move. So I don't believe there are any violent protesters in Sydney. I know the protesters. I know them. They're construction workers. They're mums and dads. They're people who are just trying to make a hard-earned, honest living. They're people who are desperate. They're fed up with the inhumane and Gestapo-like treatment that they're receiving from the New South Wales Police, from the government. And these are not violent protesters. And my message to the people of New South Wales, to the people of Australia, is to watch very carefully, because there could well be, in the near future, in the coming days, in the coming weeks, some kind of violent event which potentially could be orchestrated by the New South Wales Police themselves in order to then completely take everyone's rights away. Now, this police minister, David Elliott, he was like a child at an ice cream shop after the protests. He was going on TV and carrying on, calling people half-wits and clowns and bragging that he's got 17,500 policemen. He's going to send in more troops.
That was the word he used.
That's it. He's calling his citizens half-wits, and he was acting like a monkey with a grenade. Now, David Halfwit Elliott, as he's been known to be referred to now, is only antagonizing the situation. Now, I personally know that police command are extremely dissatisfied with the approach of uniform, with the approach of public order and riot squad. Now, these public order and riot squad, they're completely out of control.
And look, I just want to add with this, the weekend after the protest, right, there was a false protest that was spread online, and police went out there with their hundreds and hundreds of cars, and they decided to, park them all up around the city, blockade off the whole city, Ubers from entering, people just going to live their normal life in the Sydney city during the week. And then they claimed there was a protest when indeed there wasn't. It was a false flag for the police to be able to demonstrate the level of power they have over the people. Is this justified in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic? Is it a justified move to be able to do this, create a false flag, and then flex as a police force?
The pandemic is not the virus. The pandemic is the fear campaign and the campaign to intimidate the citizens. More citizens have died from suicide, from stress-related illness, from pressure, from lockdown-related pressure, from police intimidation than from coronavirus. We saw the Premier, Gulag Gladys Berejiklian, go on the air yesterday and announce to everyone that a 90-year-old grandmother has died in the hospital. Well, that's really sad to hear. My condolences to her family and friends. But for goodness sake, she was 90 years old. Nobody speaks. The Premier never speaks of the fact that in Liverpool this week, there was a man who hung himself in the park in Liverpool. And last week in Maryland, there was a man hanging off a tree in Maryland's Road. Then all over Sydney, there are suicides. There are cases of mental health. And the only way they're preventing a total disaster is by feeding the population these handouts. I think it's cynical how they're giving people $600 a week or...
I believe what you're saying here is this is almost leading to a form of UBI, universal basic income, right? Where if people can get used to living off this small amount of money over a long period of time and get conditioned to it, whilst not being able to go to their job, whilst not being able to make a income on their own terms, whether it's in construction, logistics, these type of jobs that are very prevalent in the southwest areas of Sydney, as you mentioned, it basically flattens people's lifestyle, flattens people's living. The freedom becomes lost. Now, the question is, right, with the whole pandemic, with everything going on, we've now been put into I guess a checkmate, almost a checkmate state. I don't like to say checkmate because I believe there's always a possibility out of everything. Nothing is impossible. But it seems that between 70 to 80% of people in Sydney must be vaccinated for there to be a release of the lockdown. And even then, there are no guarantees. What about the people who have mortgages to pay, families to feed, they have kids they need to look after, they need the income to be able to survive? What about that? What about that? Where is the support and understanding that?
The government is more interested at the moment in saving its own skin and ramming AstraZeneca down everyone's throats or into everyone's arms. The government, if it was seriously considering the health of the nation, they would have looked at other vaccine options that were available. Now, the Russian Sputnik vaccine was offered to the Australian government, was formally offered
Why did they turn
to
it
the
down?
Russian ambassador.
Why did
by
they
the
turn
Russian
it down?
ambassador.
Why was it rejected?
We'll never know the truth because not once has Scott Morrison or Gladys or Dan or anyone in the government commented on the Russian vaccine. And this is something we've been pushing for a few years now. But my suspicion is that Australia puts its strategic alliance with the United States first, and they put that as a priority before the health of the nation. Therefore, the Sputnik vaccine, even though it's been accepted by more than 70 nations around the world, including European nations, including European Union, including the biggest populations in the world, India, Brazil, China, have got the Sputnik vaccine and are using it and even producing it. Now, Australia has a big problem with vaccine shortages, and we just heard on the news today that Prime Minister Scott Morrison ordered 25 million doses of Moderna. Now, the AstraZeneca is a hopelessly unpopular vaccine. A lot of countries around the world have actually banned it and stopped using it.
Yeah.
Now, as usual, and I want to go on the record to say this, Australia is picking up the breadcrumbs off the table. Just like we bungled the submarines, where we spent $90 billion on submarines that never arrived. Just like buying, outdated third or fourth generation jet fighters that are hopelessly already outdated for billions of dollars. And Australia just keeps getting tricked and used by the rest of the world. Just like those decisions by the same government to lease our ports in Darwin, just like those decisions to sell or lease our power grids, water supplies, electric power stations. Now, this is a government who continues to display signs of treasonous behaviour. And I'm saying this as a proud Aussie, as a person who's born in Sydney, grew up in Sydney, went to school in Sydney, and has a proud also migrant heritage. But a true Australian is a migrant, and it's multiculturalism is the best thing that happened to this country.
Absolutely. We were the ones that built the country after the war. We were the ones that all came, built the country, created the economy, offered job opportunities, and ensured that people could have a good life here. Visited all other people that were coming into the country. I agree. Now, I want to just get back to the vaccine thing. Okay, so I did mention to you before, somebody who lost their hearing at a very young age. I got sensory neural loss, mild to moderate in the left ear, moderate to severe in the right ear. That came from an MMR vaccine, mumps, measles, rubella. Right? Naturally, I have a cautious inclination to want to get the vaccine. Right? I don't want to fucking lose my whole hearing. Okay? The percentages there, it can happen. So what I want to do is I want to make sure that I have access to not the vaccines the Australian government have boxed us into, AstraZeneca and Pfizer, but to all the potential vaccines available on the market. And as I mentioned with you before, I've been to Russia twice. I know the effectiveness of Russian medication, of Russian pharmaceuticals, and how well researched they are. And this is the reason Sputnik vaccine is very potent. It's very effective. I have a friend in Moscow who was telling me the efficiency of the Sputnik vaccine and mentioned that there's always going to be political issues that come when things like pharmaceutical dealings with the government are in place. And this is why I think Australia have made a terrible choice to not allow both the Chinese Sinovac vaccine into the country and especially the Sputnik vaccine. What do you think?
Well, certainly the Australian government has demonstrated that it puts politics before health. It's now, desperately and hopelessly trying to literally ram AstraZeneca down everyone's throats. And they've gone on a fear campaign to do it. They're talking about forcing people to take the vaccine. They brought in the army to help with the vaccine rollout. But why do you need an army to help with vaccine rollout? And armies are used for defensive and offensive purposes. The only time the army should be brought in to help in a civilian capacity is to fight bushfires or combat natural disasters. Now, we have more than enough police resources because of the fact that everyone is locked down. Crime is actually at an all-time low. People aren't moving around. People are not committing crimes. Of course, certain crimes have on the rise. For example, domestic violence and things like that. Suicides and so forth. But the government doesn't care about that. The government cares about silencing and censoring anyone who is in opposition to the government's un-Australian and Gestapo-like intimidation tactics. And censorship is rife. Sky News was taken off YouTube. The Aussie Cossack channel was taken off YouTube and is now under suspension. 2GB has, threatened me personally for speaking out. And I just want to go on the record to say, I would ask the question, 2GB, are you on the AstraZeneca payroll? Listen to 2GB. From morning to night, they're talking about AstraZeneca. I mean, not only do they have commercials about AstraZeneca, they've got all these phony callers that ring up and say, oh, I love AstraZeneca. I can't wait to get my second jab. Have you ever heard of anyone who can't wait to get their second jab? That's absolute nonsense. Whether you're pro-vaccine or anti-vaccine.
I don't know, unless they're like needles. I think there are some people out there that are kind of sick like that. They want to get needled 24/7 or something. So, but I personally wouldn't want to look forward to getting that.
There's certainly, I'm very concerned. We come from a Russian background, where we know what civil disorder is. We know what revolution is, and we know, we've seen it all. Our grandparents and great-grandparents lived through it, fought in it, went through it, and just like many other migrant communities in Western Sydney, they know. Some are yet to learn, and it would be a great tragedy if Australians who are fifth and sixth generation Australians would have to experience this in their lifetimes. It appears as though the New South Wales Police is doing everything possible to intimidate and antagonize the citizens. There is no dialogue with the communities. There is no dialogue with church leaders, multicultural community leaders. There is no dialogue. There is just intimidation. There is fear tactics. It's a fear campaign. And the Russian Orthodox bishop in Australia, Bishop George of Canberra, on the 5th of August, released an epistle where he announced and made reference to the great fear campaign that is being waged by governments and media. Now,
and so did one of the Greek Orthodox bishops as well. There's a video of him coming out and saying, "What the hell has happened to Sydney?" What do you think? With that being said, I want to add, brothels are open, right? These type of sex services are open, but they've closed the churches. Churches are a form of community, are a form of unity between the people, are a form of being able for people to find solace and meaning in God, in religion. But these have been taken away from the people too, Simeon. Isn't that a fucking joke?
Now, if churches are closed because it's so dangerous, they have to be closed not to spread the virus. Well, I propose that the New South Wales Police Force close all of their police stations, and the New South Wales Corrective Services close the jails, release the prisoners. If it's that bad that people can't pray to God, if it's that bad that people can't gather, 3 or 4 people can't be in the same place and go to a mosque and go to a church, and this is where people need God. It's times like this when people need to turn to the church, where people turn to the priests, to the bishops, to the mufti, to the imams. And this is where the communities of Western Sydney, who are the most religious people in the country, statistically. You only have to look at the Australian Bureau of Statistics and the census results to find out that it's Western Sydney, Southwest Sydney, Northwest Sydney, that are the hub. It's where the most churches are concentrated, mosques, communities, religious communities. Now, rather than work with the priests, work with the bishops, work with the muftis, the imams, the community leaders, The government is seeking to intimidate them. Now, we've heard reports of police cars parked outside churches on Sundays, monitoring how many people walk in and out. We've heard reports of New South Wales police marked vehicles doing laps around mosques, around churches to intimidate church leaders. Now, for goodness sake, these people are just trying to pray to God. And this country is a religious country. It was formed and based on religious and Christian principles, and it's based on the principles of freedom. Now, if people don't want to go to church, no one's forcing them, right? If people don't want the vaccine, they are being forced to have the vaccine. And of course, it's absolutely immoral that brothels are open. If Bunnings can be open, but a church can't be open, now, how many barbecues do we need to buy? How many bags of topsoil do we need to buy? Bunnings, Woolworths, Coles, they should be all closed. Give the small businesses a chance.
What I've noticed is it's all the big companies, all those massive business groups that have a lot of subsidiaries seem to still be operating, Simeon. And what it really shows you is that they don't care about the small businesses. They don't care about the guy over there running the coffee shop, trying to sell his cappuccinos and chai lattes with the oat milk, around the corner. They don't care about the guys, the families that run the corner stores where you get your nuts and you get, your cheese from the delicatessen, right? They have really cracked down on Aussie businesses. And I was working in HR for some time regarding employment legislation. And at the time this happened, it was when the first lockdown took place in early 2020. And one thing that I saw was, which was fucking heartbreaking, by the way, was the amount of businesses that came to a crash, because a lot of them were running off a lean business model. They had high overheads. They couldn't pay their staff. They couldn't even pay the staff out their annual leave. And, we've got to remember the staff are people. Staff are, human beings that, have families to feed, etc. And, now all these years, 1 year down the track, the same thing has happened again. But it seems that the bigger businesses, although they have a lot of funding and whatnot, they're still allowed to operate within a larger parameter, as opposed to your smaller businesses. And you go for a walk around, I went for a walk around Glebe. So many businesses are shut on a Saturday in Glebe. In Glebe, you can't even get a fucking burger anymore.
Well, I'll tell you something, that there's been a lot of talk from small business owners, and I have heard of instances where small business owning, I know some petrol station owners putting up signs and saying, police are not welcome. And this is the result of the intimidation and fear campaign which the New South Wales police and government are waging against their people. In a time where people want to look to police for safety, for security, as police officers who are there to protect and serve, the police have shown their worst. The people of Sydney have shown their best. The people of Sydney are, supporting each other. Now, the police minister goes on the record every day in the press conference, and he announces and he brags that at how many people called Crime Stoppers and Gulag Gladys and David Elliott Halfwit, call upon the citizens, dob each other in, call up the Crime Stoppers and dob your neighbours in.
That to me is communism. That is textbook communism. That the fact that they started putting QR codes on apartment buildings in Sydney to track who's coming into your place and who isn't is absolute communism. And dobbing people in, the whole dobbing culture. What's that, fucking high school? This is an absolute outrage. I really got angry when they started.
It's shameful. It's un-Australian and it's shameful. And those people who engage in this type of behaviour need to have a good look at themselves in the mirror. Now, I want to give our viewers and listeners an example, a historical example, because as we know, history repeats itself. Now, in the 1940s, in Nazi Germany, in the concentration camps, the SS employed inmates from amongst the population of Auschwitz and other concentration camps, who they used to actually help them run the gas chambers, to sort the gold teeth out and sort the clothes and the belongings of those poor people who were going to be killed. And literally were these inmates who were employed putting the bodies into the in incinerators, and it's very tragic and terrible. Now, these inmates thought that they were giving themselves, they cooperated, and they were thought that they were giving themselves a chance to prolong their lives. Now, what they didn't know is that the Germans had a policy, the SS had a policy of every 3 months of liquidating them, and they were known as the Sonderkommandos. Sonderkommandos, and these Sonderkommandos, they cooperated with the authorities of the camp. They went against their own people. They dobbed their own people in. They gassed their own people. They burned their own people in the incinerators. Only then, all of a sudden, to be herded into the same gas chamber, to be undressed and to be gassed and incinerated. Now, those people out there who are obsessed with dobbing in their own fellow citizens, who are obsessed with dobbing in their fellow Australians, who are encouraging police to enact harsher penalties. On 2GB today, on 8:73 a.m. Absolutely disgusting what I was listening to. People bringing up and saying, there should be harsher penalties. We should lock them down more. We should do this. We should do that. What about the penalties for the half-wit David Elliott as police minister with all of his resources at his disposal, who allowed the quarantine system to be bungled? There's a saying in Russian, "После боя кулаками не машут," which means after the fight, there's no point in, putting up your fists and fighting. You missed the boat, David Elliott. When you wanted to show force, you wanted to show power, and you wanted to show that you're a good police minister, you should have had the police and the army at the airports intercepting potential virus-carrying travelers. Why weren't the planes stopped? Why, to this day, and I've been on the record for the last 2 years, I've been saying this, since February last year when this was breaking out in Wuhan. I went on the record, and you can go to the Aussie Cossack channel and listen to the live conversations on 2GB radio. Stop the flights. Don't lock down, lock out. Now, there was obviously an agenda in the government to allow the flights in. The Australian government was allowing flights from Wuhan, from China, from Beijing, from Shanghai. This latest Delta strain, it came from overseas. They've brought in viruses from India, from UK, from United States. Now, why should the whole population of Australia go down on lockdown? Why should there be thousands of people dying from suicide, from lockdown-related deaths, just because somebody came back from a holiday in India, or just because somebody went on a business trip to the United States and brought the virus in? Now, the police minister calls his citizens half-wits just because they've gone down for a coffee at their local shop without a mask. Now, I'd like to propose that the Australian people are fed up with the government, and they're fed up with the half-wits who are running the government that bungled the quarantine schemes. And to this day, as we speak, as our country disintegrates, as our state disintegrates and our country falls into debt, and people are dying not of coronavirus, but of lockdown-related death, we continue to allow planes into Australia. Now, that is treason. That's either treason, complete stupidity, or there's an agenda to bring the virus into the country. We all know about the bungled quarantine hotel schemes, where security guards that were employed by the government to guard infected travelers were having sex in the hotels with the travelers.
Mm-hmm. That was in Melbourne, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah. Where's the backlash there? So people are copping fines because they're visiting each other, because a mother visits her daughter, or a dying grandmother wants to see her.
Well,
son.
by the end of it, I was getting paranoid for visiting my own parents, even though they lived 8 minutes away, because I didn't want to get fucking pulled over.
There's a fear campaign. Now, the fear campaign is generated by the fear of the government. The government are in fear themselves. Gladys stands up in front of the nation every day and lies, and her face is visibly stressed. And she's pushing this AstraZeneca agenda. She's pushing the vaccine agenda. If the government really cared about the Australian people, they would have banned all incoming flight traffic. And any plane that attempted to enter Australia should have been turned around, and the military should have been used against. This virus is a man-made virus made in the Wuhan labs with the backing of the Americans. And that's obvious and that's evident. We'll never hear that on the mainstream.
Yeah, I do believe that it was manufactured virus. I do believe it was a manufactured virus. I think after it, like, truth really only comes out later on in history. And I do understand that the continual deployment of flights into Australia has really made it a complex matter to ask yourself, well, how did Australia allow all these incoming flights in and not have a better handle of, the COVID matters? Well, we don't know, because that is a lack of issue on their part. And then the provision of the vaccines is another thing. Now, what I want to move into, actually, and this kind of comes from before what I mentioned, is why has Australia not developed a good alliance with Russia? Are we still in this Cold War that occurred more than 50 years ago after World War II? I mean, I always felt the Cold War never ended. Never ended with China, never ended with Russia. There was always this creeping fear that, Russians were not to be trusted, that, there was, spies, Russian spies. You probably remember the Petrov affair, and all of a sudden there were these scares about it. Do you believe this has had an influence on Australia not taking ownership and bringing in the Sputnik, which again is a very highly effective vaccine for coronavirus? Do you think this is the case?
Australia has a long history of very unusual relations with Russia. Australia has been, a colony of Great Britain for many years, up until Federation. And you could say that the euro, it was independent after Federation, but de facto it remained a colony in terms of its geopolitical position. And only really under Prime Minister William Hughes, towards the end of World War I, did Australia actually have its own sovereign position in international politics. Before that, Australia was never represented at the international treaties and that government meetings as its own country. It was represented always by Great Britain. Now, following the end of World War I, Russia obviously became a communist country with the Bolshevik Revolution, and the paranoia of the Russians under the bed started, the Reds under the beds, and this Red threat. And Australia only resumed diplomatic relations with the Russians in the 40s. Now, that lasted until 1991. And then obviously in the 90s, Putin came to power in the late 90s, and it started again. We started talking about Russian hacking, Russian missiles, Russian poisoning, Russian interference, Russian agents, Russian influence. And this is a common theme that's being spun to Australia, either by the Americans or by the English. Now, you all know Fort Denison. You all know,
it's all bullshit.
Yes, you all know Fort Denison in the middle of Sydney Harbour, beautiful little fort. That was built in the 1850s against the supposed Russian invasion. Now, there are gun emplacements up and down Newcastle and Wollongong on the coast. Even Tasmania has gun emplacements, beautiful historical now, obviously, places of heritage, naval gun emplacements that were built to face a supposed Russian fleet that was supposed to come from Antarctica and invade Australia. Now, where were the Aussies getting all of this information from? It was the British, in fact, that were spinning this hysteria on purpose in order to keep Australia under their thumb. They were using the so-called Russian threat to make sure that Australia geopolitically would always remain under Great Britain. And this, obviously, a great example of this is the Russian Crimean cannons, which are on display at Centennial Park.
Where are they?
St Kilda Barracks. Yes. These cannons are on in Tasmania, Hobart, Launceston, Adelaide, St Kilda Barracks in Melbourne, and Centennial Park in Sydney. Now, these cannons were given by the British to the Australian government as a sign of the British victory in Crimea in the 1850s. But these cannons are still there to this day. But in reality, these cannons weren't given as a sign of victory. These cannons were sent from the other side of the world to Australia to remind the Australians that they are just a colony, that Great Britain is defending Australia. And this is what the Americans are doing now. The Americans have got Australia in the corner using the China threat and the so-called Russian threat to make sure that Australia follows in every way. Now, there is no Russian threat. Russia has never had any plans in its military doctrine in any stage of the history of the Russian Empire or the Soviet Union or the Russian Federation to attack Australia.
I know that, and that's a very I know that, and that's a very interesting thing, because you see, the only time this fear of Russia even came close was the Petrov affair, which in itself isn't really an issue. You know what I mean? It was speculation at the end of the day. That was the closest thing, right? That, oh, it was only speculation. It may have been, may have not been. It wasn't even a problem. But this was speculation created by the government at the time, by the media at the time, to impose fear into people. And when you really look at the reality of how the imposition of Russia is, you see, one thing I remember is that after the fall of the Soviet Union, the Western world never thought Russia would be powerful again, right? And then during the 90s, when Putin came into power, and then later toward the early 2000s, when he returned, in the early 2000s when he returned back into power too, Russia suddenly was booming economically, booming in terms of world relations, and the West did not expect Russia to be able to recover so quick from the fall of the Soviet Union, right? They did not expect Russia to be able to have that strength and power that they had during the Soviet Union, and the level of concision. Now, I feel like because of that, there still remained this instilled fear from the West to, I guess, shy away from Russian relations in fear that, you know, this type of unsettling issue from the Cold War may reemerge.
Well, certainly, I think Australia has been used and abused by America and Great Britain, and unfortunately, Australia, because of their alliances with the Americans and the British, are restricted, and it's to their demise. To this great country of Australia, it's the demise of the country. For example, why has Australia got sanctions against Russia? The only practical reason could be that Australia is following its American puppet masters. Why would Australia ban meat exports to Russia when this benefited the Australian farmers to the tune of billions of dollars a year? Why would Australia ban uranium exports to Russia when this benefited Australian mining industry to the tune of $1 billion a year? Why would Australia not consider Russian military hardware when it's 10 times cheaper, more reliable and available? The Australian government is in a complete fiasco with the submarine situation, where they spent $90 billion on French submarines that never actually came. And Indonesia has 45 Soviet submarines that are still working, that are still swimming, and that are still patrolling the northern seas of this country. Meanwhile, I don't know how many Australian submarines there are at the moment, but I certainly know that those submarines that were supposed to arrive never arrived. And the Australian taxpayer has been tricked and is out of pocket, just like the Australian taxpayer was tricked and out of pocket, acquiring vaccines that nobody wants. Nobody wants AstraZeneca. Mm-hmm. Nobody wants inferior vaccines.
See, this is what it comes to. This is what it comes to. All the rejection of trade between Australia and Russia in the past has led to this situation where we cannot even get the Sputnik vaccine for the betterment of health for the Australian people. And we've been backed into this corner where we're left with just AZ, Pfizer. Yes, we have Moderna coming, when really we should have had that sooner. But this has been the end game as a result of our failure to build a good alliance with Russia.
Well,
right?
I blame the media. I blame organizations like Channel 9, who own 2GB Radio, who own 2UE Radio. Incidentally, it's good to point out that the Australian radio industry is completely monopolized in the hands of the private sector, who, I'm not going to put it as a statement, I'll put it as a question. Is 2GB on the AstraZeneca payroll? You can certainly find out. We'll subpoena, the bank accounts, we'll subpoena the agreements that 2GB signed, potentially, with AstraZeneca, if they have signed them. But I would be very surprised if there's no commercial agreement in place, because these guys, like Ray Hadley, do not speak for the Australian people. They don't speak for the people of Western Sydney. They don't speak for the construction industry. In fact, the unions have gone quiet. Where are the unions? I'm in the construction business. 2 or 3 years ago, if there was a worker, who wasn't wearing a hard hat on site, you would have had 25 union reps pull up and close the site down, and would have had a trade union dispute, and they had a riot and a protest. Now we've got 200,000 construction workers on the brink of poverty, banned from working. All the construction sites are closed, and the unions have gone silent. Well, at least Gladys admitted it. She thanked industry for their cooperation. So some people obviously are selling out the people. There are some people out there who are benefiting from the situation that the Australian people find themselves in. And of course, it's all right for Ray Hadley to get on the news and attack anyone who's anti-vaccine or attack anyone who's speaking up against the government, because he hasn't lost his job, because he hasn't lost his livelihood, because he's able to continue operating his business.
Well, that's the thing. Everybody's coming from a position of where they're still on a safety net. As soon as that safety net is lost, then they'll be asking questions.
Well, that brings me back to the basis of the Zonda commandos. Anyone who is currently supporting the regime, supporting the intimidation and fear tactics, is nothing more than a Zonda commando. Those people that now say, oh, look at those bad protesters, or look at those bad people who are speaking out. You're next. You are next. You want to dob your neighbors in. People who want to dob their neighbors in for having a barbecue, these people are next. The police, the army, they will go door to door. They'll kick the doors down. They'll find out who's living there. They'll hold you down. They'll put the vaccine into you. It's quite clear.
They will.
I hope I'm wrong. I hope I'm wrong.
No. I hope I'm wrong too. I was thinking the same thing. We've seen it happen before in history. It might sound fucking outrageous to the viewers, but this is the end game, right? It's only been less than 100 years ago where there was Nazi Germany, where there was the Soviet Union, where there were things like gulags and concentration camps, right? Do you think humans have changed much in the last 100 years? As you mentioned, Simeon,
well, put it
history
this way,
always repeats itself.
The police integrity hotline, where traditionally citizens are able to call up and make a complaint against police who are acting corruptly or harassing or intimidating citizens, it's now actually been suspended. They've said, if you ring them up, they'll say, due to COVID, we are now not taking any calls. So this is a time in history where police intimidation and harassment of citizens is at its highest, and all of the institutions that were put in place and the processes were put in place to safeguard citizens against these, Gestapo-like tactics are nowhere to be seen. The unions that are supposed to protect construction workers are nowhere to be heard or seen.
Because they've been silent.
The MPs who were elected by the people to represent the people's interests are nowhere to be seen. The parliament, which is supposed to be making decisions, is nowhere to be seen. Now, all of these decisions, which are absolutely outrageous and extremist, are being made illegally, being shoved through without any consideration. There's no parliamentary debate on them. And, for the record, Labor and Liberal, it's the same party. We can see now that the people in Labor and Liberal, they're either on the take, they're part of the ploy.
Well, that's the thing. They're all part of the centre. They're all part of the centre, and I feel like they're also being pushed to make decisions that are arbitrary of their choice. I don't believe even Gladys has control over what she's saying. I believe she's been passed information, told to deploy that information with almost no conscious thought. And for example, when construction got shut down, it wasn't even a necessary thing to shut construction down, right? And
there was not
the main
one
reason
COVID case from construction. Just to put that out there, there was not one case of COVID on a construction site.
And this is why I started, realizing, well, hang on, what the fuck? Most of the construction that we see happening out in Western Sydney, Marsden Park, Oran Park, all this, right? Silverdale, all that area, Penrith, yada yada, right? So why are they locking down all the workers who work in construction, where a lot of the construction is taking place? And now they're demanding these construction workers to get the jab to go back to fucking work, right? Is that not a breach of freedom? Is that not a breach of choice?
Well, the construction workers, they're being intimidated and forced into taking the vaccine, just like all the workers are. Now, Prime Minister Scott Morrison promised the nation there will be no mandatory vaccination. And he repeated it a few times. And it seems, when you know they're lying, that's when they're trying to announce something. When they say no, they really mean yes. When they say yes, they really mean no. And it's really clear when Gladys is lying because her lips are moving. So it's a dead giveaway. Now, obviously, Gladys, she's not making this up herself. She's got advisors. She's got handlers. There are people in the background, grey cardinals, who are telling Gladys what to say. The case numbers. Now, there was a Sydney-based comedian who predicted the case numbers for 5 days in a row, because it's all a complete farce. It's a complete farce. It's the real vaccine.
if we can't trust the numbers they gave in the protest, where they said it was 3,500 people, when really it was tens and thousands of people, if you look at the videos and look at what was uploaded online, you know that they could be lying about the COVID case numbers. They could be lying about the COVID deaths.
Look,
It's already a level of distrust in the information because
there's
it is an information war.
There's widespread intimidation against protest leaders. There's widespread police intimidation and fear tactics being deployed against leaders in the construction industry. And I know that people in the unions have been warned and have been intimidated by representatives of government, of police, to keep their mouths shut. The thing is, the police are going about this the wrong way. To prevent violence and to prevent disorder, you need dialogue. You need prevention and intervention. That is the basis of counterterrorism. The only way to prevent terrorism is to have intervention and prevention. Now, you can't prevent a terrorist attack if it's already happened. Now, what they're doing is they're closing mosques. They're antagonizing, the migrants, the Muslims, the Christians, all the people that feel strongly about religion. And the police themselves are creating the perfect storm. They are inciting the perfect storm, the conditions for the potential for violence. Now, I'm sick and tired of going on the air and going on the record, imploring people not to be violent, imploring people not to go to violent protests, not to cause violence against police. Now, we're beginning to look like idiots here, the community leaders, because the police are doing everything possible to actually incite the violence. And the police think that by deploying more police, deploying military, they're going to win. And it's never happened. Never in the history of civilization has it ever ended well for the government when military are deployed against people. And I call upon the Honourable Scott Morrison to stand down his troops, to stand down the military, to curb the police response, and for police to become accountable. Reopen the police integrity hotline. In fact, not only reopen it, give it more resources. We want every single account of police intimidation documented, thoroughly investigated. This is not the time to cut resources to police intimidation. A construction worker coming home from a building site and you send 56 police cars to surround him. Meanwhile, police are bashing citizens. Police are pepper spraying, pensioners. Police are, going into people's houses without warrants and, physically, bashing them, arresting them, cuffing them, putting them into paddy wagons, only then to give them a move along direction. Since when do you can justify the reasonable use of force for a move along direction? Now there's calls by treasonous calls by people on 2GB radio announcers. And today, I heard it myself, 10th of August on 2GB on the afternoon show Drive, where this radio announcer is absolutely despicably, selfishly, disgusting, very un-Australian of him, and he's calling upon the government to increase the penalties. He is a Sonderkommando. He's next. Yes, you can get rid of Simeon Boykov. You can arrest him. You can arrest the next person. You can arrest all his followers. You can arrest all the Christians. You can arrest the bishops. You can arrest the priests. You can arrest the imams, the muftis. You can arrest the ex-servicemen. You can arrest the ex-police. You can arrest the RSL members. You can arrest everyone who's part of a fishing club or a boating club or a sports club. You can arrest all the tradesmen, construction workers. You'll be left with people in nursing homes and radio announcers like Ray Hadley. But guess what, Ray Hadley? You're next as well. They're coming for you. And we know this. I'm not saying this because I'm a conspiracy theorist.
It's a domino effect. We've seen it happen. Remember, in Germany, you remember the Ernst Röhm, the brown shorts, right? From the brown shorts, Night of the Long Knives, right? Once allied with Hitler, then later Hitler came for him and his brown shirts, and he liquidated them. He got rid of all of them, right? He was next. He was working alongside him.
The same thing happened in the Soviet Union. The original Bolsheviks who were in 1917 helping Lenin come to power. By the time Stalin was in power and by the time the 1937 purges were over, all of the original crew were all liquidated. They were all dead and killed. And they were the ones that were promoting this fear campaign, the terror campaign. So those people out there who want to instill fear, intimidation, who want to who call upon police to increase their powers, to send in military against civilians, you're all next. You are next. At least those people who are speaking up now have the courage to do so. History will judge everyone accordingly. Everyone involved in this situation will be judged by history. And we'll see who are the
That's
patriots,
correct.
who are the people who defended the people of Australia.
Who are the people that said death before dishonor? Death before dishonor.
We
Because
don't want
as
to
soon as
incite
you
any
fall into the frame,
extremism. We don't want to incite any extremism. And I'll say it again for the record. We're completely against violence for the sole reason is that I believe I'm of the opinion of the belief that the government and the police they would love for there to be a violent incident. David Elliott would love for there to be some kind of violence against police. The way he was carrying on about pot plants being thrown at horses, you'd think that someone invaded Tasmania, or there was an airborne assault on Sydney. The way he was carrying on, calling the army, threatening to deploy 17,500 police officers into Sydney. So he's only waiting for somebody to snap and lose the plot and cause violence. So my fellow Australians, I implore you all, please do not consider violence at all in any capacity. We need a political solution. We need the government to resign.
Violence is not the answer. But what it is has to do with a sense of honor, right? Would you rather be a man standing, fighting for his life, than a man begging on his knees in a dishonorable fashion? You know what I mean? This is where you need to stand and fight for your rights. You need to stand and fight firm for what you believe in with honor.
This is where we understand why Western Sydney is targeted, because Western Sydney contains the highest proportion of people.
They have the masculine drive.
No, the people 30% of the citizens in Western Sydney are born overseas. Now, Australia has had a long-running policy of attracting migrants from war-torn countries on refugee visas. Now, all these people from Afghanistan, Iraq, Iran, Syria, from Lebanon, from the Middle East, from Eastern European countries, from Serbia, from Croatia, from Albania, Bosnia. These are all people who lived through war. These are people that lived through dictatorship. These are people that feel very strongly about religion, who believe in God, who are God-fearing, and they know exactly what's going on. They've seen it all before. Now, there are a lot of good Australians.
History repeats itself. There are different contexts. There are different contexts for different matters, but this context, I think the biggest thing is everything that is happening in the present time justified in the guise of a pandemic. And I feel like what we've come to understand, where we both meet the same ends, especially after our understanding of history, is it doesn't seem justified. It seems unreasonable use of force. It seems like it's gone too far, and you just have to look no further than seeing the level of force used in other countries, the level of the level of restrictions imposed on other people. There are lockdowns. There are things that need to be done to maintain pandemic situations, but not to the extremity where people fear for their lives in a state of tyranny.
Well, every year on the 9th of May, the Sydney communities remember Victory Day, a victory against German fascism. And the Russian communities of Sydney, the Jewish communities of Eastern Sydney, Waverley, Bondi, they remember the Holocaust. They remember the struggle of the Soviet Union, the Russian people, against Germany. And we do this every year. We lay wreaths. We have a moment of silence. And remember, Anzacs also remember this, in April. And, every year, consistently, the Anzac parades are getting smaller and smaller and smaller. The government pours more money into funding and giving resources and giving money towards Mardi Gras than it does to Anzac parades, because the government prefers to destroy any sense of Aussie patriotism, any sense of Australian pride, any sense of Anzac spirit, any sense of comradeship. They're destroying the family system. They just recently legalized abortion, even though 150,000 people came out on the streets of Sydney in Martin Place to say no to abortion. And destroying the family unit, promoting AVOs, promoting divorces. The whole police system and justice system is, 60% of it works on destroying the family unit, on putting fathers in jail, on putting
And
families.
this has happened from way back. I feel like this was some post-World War II shit during the 60s and 70s. The family unit started slowly being destroyed through more type of secular ways of thinking, more type of freer ways of being able to maintain human life. When now what we see is a complete abomination of desolation, where there are people getting impregnated out of wedlock, dissolution of marriage, dissolution of roles between the masculine and feminine, whereby there is no stable structure, which over a period of history has proven to be foundational for human life. And of course, people have lost faith in the rewards that they can reap from the civilization because of this complete confusion of culture and destruction of the family unit, which is paramount to
Well,
human
it's very
civilization.
hypocritical. The government poured so many resources into promoting choice and promoting freedom when it was connected to other issues, gender equality and so forth. Now, where are all those protesters? Where are all those businesses who flew the rainbow flag and all those Sydney City Council, the guys of choice? They said, choice, my body, my choice, pro-abortion. Now, all of a sudden, when the religious population of Sydney, of Western Sydney, are saying we want choice, we don't want the vaccine, or we don't want AstraZeneca, we'd rather have Sputnik or something else, they're considered to be enemies of the state. They're being repressed.
So I'm considered an enemy of a state. I'm considered the enemy of a state because I want the Sputnik vaccine or Sinovac because I had hearing loss and I have more caution in taking the vaccines, which AstraZeneca has been proven to cause blood clots. Pfizer has had its own issues. Why can't I, as an individual, be given free choice to the vaccine that I want to choose to have based on my medical conditions? Why?
Well,
because the Australian government do not allow it.
I hope the New South Wales Premier is watching this, and Mike Fuller is watching this, the Commissioner, and halfway David Elliott. If the government was interested in vaccinating the population, and it's willing to put the health first, in front of political alliances, bring on Sputnik. Pick up the phone, call the Russian ambassador, Alexei Pavlovsky, because he's already offered it to you. The Russians have offered Sputnik. And it's not a question of how much is it going to cost, because I'm sure if it's a question of money, the Russian government will give Australia Sputnik for free. It's a question of
how much do you care about the people?
Yeah,
how much
the
do
people
you
of Western
care about
Sydney,
the people and the choice of their medicine?
I can always be certain to say and go on the record to say, as a community leader, born and bred and raised in Western Sydney, that if Sputnik was offered, people would come forward to get the vaccine. People don't want AstraZeneca. And it doesn't matter how many times Ray Hadley on 2GB talks about it and has fake interviews with, grandmothers who have had this AstraZeneca and they can't wait to get their second shot or their third shot. It doesn't matter how much propaganda you tell us on the TV. People don't want it, and they don't have to have it. And where are all the pro-abortion protesters? Where are all those, people on the streets who are saying my body, my choice? Where are all those people now? Why have you gone silent all of a sudden? Because it's all about promoting
the narrative does not fit. The narrative does not fit their belief. They like to pick and choose. Now, I want to come to the end of our podcast now with one final type of discussion to close off, as we're just about an hour in. And by the way, thank you so much for this. This is definitely, we've got so many viewers coming in and out. This is definitely a podcast that many people wanted to hear, Simeon. So really appreciate it. So to close off, the future leadership of Australia. Now, I've always felt that Australian leadership, and you mentioned this before, because Australia was formed as a penal colony, slave colony, right, and has been a slave colony for all its time, and then under the ANZUS Treaty had the US relations and NZ relations, which helped govern particular international decisions and diplomacy, right, as well as the UK being under the UK Commonwealth. Australia has never really been a free country acting autonomously out of its own interests, Simeon. And what that means is almost all leaders that have come and run Australia have been running the country under the guise of foreign implementation, right? Whether that be from America or UK. Now, we now see the failure of these particular, this long type of systematic way that Australia have run with the whole vaccine issue, with the lockdowns, with what's going on in the country right now. What will be the best future leadership for Australia? What do you envision as a great future leadership?
In my opinion, the future leaders of Australia will be people who are not from Liberal, who are not from Labor, people who are from minority parties. They have to be people who are not connected to the establishment. The Australian people have no trust in anyone who is from the major parties. The Australian people have no trust in the current leadership. The current leadership should resign, and the current leadership of the country is playing with fire, and they're going to create a situation where the Australian military is going to be so busy fighting its own population that we're going to expose ourselves to a potential invasion from Indonesia or China. And let me go on the record to say it.
All we need to do is get caught with our pants down.
Exactly right. Now, China are looking at us, at Australia, with hungry eyes, just waiting for the moment to pounce. Now, the Americans are hopeless at the moment. Joe Biden has no idea what he's doing. He's 80-something years old. He can't even, answer questions at a press conference. We can't rely on the American alliance. Now, Australia needs to form new connections and form new partnerships. Australia needs to announce its neutrality and distance itself from the American military alliance, because that's only it's only ruining our chances to find new international partners. Now, the Russian Federation, in my opinion, is a potential very good partner. Yeah, Vladimir Putin. Well, I would say that at the moment, and I might do this on the Aussie Cossack channel, we might hit the streets of Sydney, do a bit of street journalism, and just start asking everyday Aussies, who would they rather?
If I was there, I'd be joining you, man. If I was there, I'd be joining you.
We'll see. We'll do a popularity contest. Who's more popular, Gladys Berejiklian, or Vladimir Putin? Or for the Victorians out there, Dictator Dan or Vladimir Putin? Now, it's not to say that Russia has interests here. Russia has no interests here, to be honest. Russia has 1/6 of the world's land mass.
It has an abundance of land, abundance of resources, abundance of culture, and complete access to both Asia and Europe. Right? Why would it need anything? Even over across where Anadyr is, towards the Alaskan border, it has that annexing pathway across the Arctic to America. Yeah. There's no need for Russia to think about invading or taking place in Australia. Nothing.
Absolutely. Look, in conclusion, my message to the people of Sydney, to the people of Victoria, Queensland, to the people, all across Australia, have unity against police intimidation. Muslims, Christians, third, fifth, sixth, fourth generation Aussies, we're all in the same boat now. There should be no divisions between us. It doesn't matter what religion or nationality or background you come from. Don't dob your neighbours in. Support your neighbours. Love thy neighbour. What the Premier is telling us is exactly the opposite of what Jesus said. Of what Jesus said. Christian values, Muslim values, doesn't really matter. Everyone is in the same boat at the moment. And for me,
absolutely, we all got to be brothers and sisters and love each other. We got to be brothers and sisters and love each other and stand up for each other and our freedom. We will not be intimidated.
Exactly right. These days, at the moment, we must seek unity amongst the ranks, amongst the people, and only then will the police and the army and the government realize that their fear tactics, that their intimidation tactics that they're using through this lockdown are not working. We need a political solution. I call upon all my fellow Australians, do not consider anything violent or anything against the law. I know it's very hard now these days to stay within the law, and it's very frustrating, and there are a lot of people out there who are on edge. But if there's one instance of violence or mass violence or terrorism anywhere in the country, then we're all in trouble, because that's the excuse the police need. That's the excuse that
to create martial law over the whole country.
Straight away, you'll have
to the point that you can't get your fucking packet of chips across the 7-Eleven.
We'll have checkpoints on streets. They'll block off all the major roads. And when the Australian army can't handle, the job of enforcing martial law, guess which bases we have on our territory? Guess whose countries' bases are here? The United States. The United States. The United States has thousands of troops in Australia. Now, I'm sure the last thing we want as Australian citizens are foreign troops, with their Humvees and their American democracy, which they've brought to Afghanistan and Iraq, patrolling the streets of Greenacre, Campsie and Liverpool. That's the last thing we want. So my fellow Australians, please refrain from any violence. Get active and mobilise politically. Look to each other, to support each other. Stop voting for Liberal and Labor. They're traitors. They're treason. Liberal and Labor are the ones that sold our ports to China. Liberal and Labor are the ones that sold our airports, our farming, the best land we have. They've sold our power grids. They've even sold the wires the power runs on. These are traitors. They should be, in the future, we'll look back on what's happening now, and I'm sure there'll be plenty of, be like a Nuremberg trial. It'll be like a Hague all over again. There'll be plenty of
everything. History stands the test of time, man. All I can say is we will know later on down the track what really went on under the underhanded dealings of the government here during this period of time, and the truth will come out. It cannot be hidden. It cannot be hid underneath in the darkness. The light will come, and the light will show the truth of what is really going on with how Australia have handled this situation at the present time.
Well, yes, of course. And I call upon, the intelligence services of this country, law enforcement, counterterrorism, ASIO and AFP, to be patriots at this time and to make the right decisions and to weed out those people in the Australian government who are behaving treasonously. We have to weed out the traitors, weed out the people who are destroying this country and make way for the patriots. And all of those cabinet meetings which the Prime Minister has been having and making these decisions without consulting the people, without consulting the Parliament, they've all been done via Zoom. Now, that's all backed up on a hard drive somewhere. I would love to see and subpoena all of these secret meetings that the government's been having, who they're speaking to, who's instructing them, and which script they're working off. Because Gladys Berejiklian, she couldn't organise a dinner party, let alone run the state. So obviously someone's telling her what to do. She's visibly stressed. She's under pressure. She needs to resign. Gladys needs to go on sick leave, and she needs to be replaced with people who love Australia, with people who love the Australian people and are willing and ready to defend Australia's interests. And Australia's interests mean Australian people come first. And Australian people are all the people that live here. As far as I'm concerned, a true blue Aussie is anyone. A true blue Aussie is the Korean dry cleaner. A true blue Aussie is the Lebanese kebab shop owner. A true blue Aussie is the Greek fish and chip shop owner. They're all Aussies. They're all brothers. They're all our friends. And we need to unite, not dob each other in, not listen to the government when they ask us to perform illegal actions against citizens, and not give in to the fear and intimidation tactics.
Divided we fall, united we stand. Let's all bring in ourselves together and stand and fight the good fight, because without that, we will crumble like a pack of dominoes, man, starting from southwest Sydney all the way out to the rest of the country, right? We need to stand united.
I agree. Thank you.
And what I would like to say is, man, you're going to be doing the right thing with unity. I want you to bring all the people together. I want more people to listen to your message. Now, I have looked at the comments. There's been a whole fucking ton of comments, so I just want to address them right now before we go. I can't obviously address every comment, so I'm just going to put something in a nutshell. If you are not happy with what you heard on this podcast, obviously you're sensitive to information, right? And what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that if anybody comes in here and feels that they don't like what they heard, just turn it off. You have the shutdown button at your disposal. You don't have to listen to what we have to say. He who has ears, let him hear, okay? We are showing other points of view of what's going on at the moment, information that is not readily available on your mainstream news and media. And we know that there is information out there that people would love to hear that don't have the opportunity to hear. And we want to say thank you, Simeon, for coming on and being able to provide this information and give hope to the Australian people who want to find themselves sooner than later out of this lockdown.
Sorry, in the words of Gaddafi, what was the question?
There was no question. The question is, we want to say thank you.
Thank you very much. Look, and I'm just reading the comments here. Can I just say, I'm not advocating any vaccines at all. I'm just putting it on the Australian government, testing them to expose their links to AstraZeneca and the AstraZeneca lobby. People don't want the AstraZeneca vaccine. People don't want any vaccine. And if they need a vaccine, let them choose. I'm not lobbying Sputnik in particular. I'm just lobbying choice. You can have a vaccine or you don't want a vaccine. You should be able to choose. No one should be forced. But if people want Sputnik, why not? I know personally, I speak to the embassy, I speak to the consulate. I know that there are thousands of people ringing up, sending emails, asking the Russian government for the vaccine. Now, that's just a test for the Australian government. Are they going to put the people's health first, or will they put their political alliances with the United States first?
Absolutely.
Okay, and there's a question here. What is Simeon going to do for the Australian people if he becomes Prime Minister? Well, the first thing I'd do is nationalize everything that China has bought. Nationalize it all. Nationalize everything that China's leased. And start exposing who were the people that were selling off Australian assets. Now, Australians' strategic assets like dams, hydroelectric dams, power stations, airports, ports, these are objects that in the event of a war or a military conflict have to be defended to the last drop. We don't have to defend anything because we don't own anything already. If a war breaks out with China, there won't be a war. There'll be a Chinese advisor who will land in Canberra, walk out of the plane, like in that commercial for Colorbond fencing, where he'll just walk out and have a look and suck it all in and say, I own all of this. So when we talk about foreign influence, there's no Russian foreign influence in Australia. The most foreign influence you'll get from Russia is probably in the Dan Murphy section of your spirits, the spirits aisle.
The vodka.
Honestly, I've said this on 2GB. There are no Russian spies in Australia because if there were Russian spies, I'd love to invite them for a barbecue and a yarn. Unfortunately, Russia does not view Australia as important enough to send spies or to do covert operations here. There is nothing of interest here. Australia should be for armed neutrality. We should be neutral.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we should be neutral, and we should, stop these sanctions. Stop the sanctions against the rest of the world, and definitely stop our reliance on America. Stop our reliance on China.
There's probably a few more questions, but you know what? We'll wrap it up. I feel like we've really covered a whole lot of different topics today, and again, thank you very much. Was there anything that you'd like to say before we close off the podcast?
Yeah, just for all the representatives of the police listening, we've reinforced the message: there's no violence, no radicalism, no extremism. I know that this interview is going to get a lot of views on YouTube and everywhere, and there's going to be people out there saying that, we're radicalizing people. I'm just going to say in response, we're for Australia. We're for the people of Western Sydney, the people of Sydney. We're for the construction workers. And also, just to reinforce my message to all the Australians out there who are happy about the fact that there's intimidation and fear, you're next. So stand up for yourselves. Stand up for your neighbours. Don't be Sonderkommandos who are shoving people into the incinerators. Be true blue Aussies. Don't dob each other in. Unite together. We're all united. All the multicultural communities of Sydney, the Assyrians, the Lebanese, the Greeks, the Serbians, the Croatians, the Bosnians, the Albanians, the Russians, fifth, sixth generation Australians. And, we should have started with this, but we can end with it. We'd like to acknowledge the traditional landowners of this land and the Aboriginal people. And obviously, they are the real owners of this country, and we're all migrants and we're all guests. So a big shout out to all the Aboriginal elders, past and present.
Absolutely. We thank you very much for their history and what they've done, and we want to give them honour and respect, and we want to say thank you very much to everybody who also came on this podcast to support what we've been discussing, and this is the first of many. We hope to have you on the show again, Simeon.
Thank you. Unless we're arrested and the show's banned. All the best.
Thank you.